Arthur Rolnick. I am a senior fellow at the Perry School of Public Affairs, co-director of an institute on early childhood education, one that promotes the research as well as outreach. So we do a lot of community outreach on early ed around the Twin Cities, actually around the whole state, trying to take the best research and implement it. My background's a little strange. 40 years at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, director of research. Most of my research was on pre-Civil War banking, if you will, and knew very little, if anything, about education and early childhood education in particular. But about 12 years ago or so, getting pushed by a former governor of Minnesota and a mayor of Minneapolis to do an economic analysis of education and early childhood education in particular. Well, it started this way. They had a lunch in which they presented their ideas, and basically their ideas were, this is a good thing to do. We have a moral obligation to help these children. And I said to them, you can make moral arguments for helping kids in kindergarten through 12th grade, helping kids get to college, helping kids keep out of prison, reducing pollution. I said, you can make all kinds of moral arguments. I said, but I strongly think if you're going to make any headway politically on this, you needed to do some sort of an economic analysis. Because policymakers need to rank. They got all kinds of good things to invest in, but what's the best? What's the priority? How do you prioritize it? And that's what an economic analysis will do. It'll give you some sense of the kind of return you would get on that investment. So I was pushing them to do that, tell people that was my mistake, because they said, okay, Rolnick, we agree. How would you like to come on the board? They had this nonprofit promoting early childhood and do the research for us. So the question is, how do you get started? I wasn't going to start doing my own research on this thing. I just went to the literature, and there were 3 incredible longitudinal studies which we were able to get the basic data from these studies, and these are studies that followed kids for 30, 40 years. And we took one in particular and really went deep into it, and this is the Perry Preschool program, which started in the early 60s, Ypsilanti, Michigan, 123 at-risk parents, randomly divide them into 2 groups. So the methodology doesn't get much better than this. And there's a control group that does not get the program, and then there's the program group. And the program included 2.5 hours a day, 5 days a week for 9.5 months of early childhood education time in a center-based program, plus a lot of home visiting, working with the parent. 3 and 4-year-olds, it was a 2-year program. So it had all the makings of, if this was going to work, Perry Preschool, this pilot, this experiment should show us the impact. And sure enough, it did, although it's very interesting with the Perry Preschool program. At the 10-year study, they found the IQ goes up, and then by the 3rd grade, the IQ of the kids who were in the program relative to the control group comes back down. Almost no difference. And you hear a lot about fade out in these early ed programs. Well, that was one of the major results. And in fact, after 10 years, they actually viewed Perry as a failure because IQ basically didn't change, or didn't change significantly. But we had, my co-author, a fellow by the name of Rob Grunewald, and I, we had 30 years worth of data initially. Now we have 40. And we had outcomes, long-term outcomes. Whether the child was proficient in the 6th grade, graduated high school, started a family, got a job, paid taxes, stayed off welfare, and we look at the crime. We were asking the question, do these kids fare better as adults? We could look at a variety of metrics, but these were sort of the key ones, and we had the data. And we could put this is what economists do, we can put dollar values. We also had some short-run data that was pretty impressive. Even though the IQs didn't necessarily go up, the kids who were in the program were much less likely to need special ed, which means their emotional IQ was probably a lot better. A significant savings if they don't need special ed, and very few of them were retained in a grade. So we reduced the number of children coming from low-income families in Perry that would need special ed or would be retained. Those are significant savings. So we had those savings. We had the fact that if the child graduated high school, odds are they're going to get a better job. And so we had that data. Odds are they would pay taxes, stay off welfare. We could put dollar values on all that, and we could put dollar values on the drop in criminal activity. It went down 50% compared to the control group. So we have the dollar values of the benefits, we have the dollar values of the cost, and we asked a simple question that economists would ask or business people would ask. In today's dollars, it was a 2-year program for 3 and 4-year-olds, $20,000. What was the return on that investment? Now, with the kind of data that we had, there's a formula in which you can back out. It's called the internal rate of return. It's the annual rate of interest, the implied annual rate of interest on that $20,000, okay? We didn't know what we were going to get. We figured if we could beat 5.8%, we were doing well, because 5.8% is the annual rate of return post-World War II on the stock market. So one argument is you're going to take public dollars out of the economy, take money out of the economy, put them into some public investment, you better beat 5.8. So that was kind of our hurdle. So we figured if we could get 6, 7, 7.5, we're doing well. We got an 18% inflation-adjusted return. In fact, the number was so high, it was almost embarrassing. I sent Rob Grunwald back. I said, Rob, I want you to recalculate this. And he did it a second, a third, and a fourth time. We kept getting 18%. Finally, we took all the data. We sent it to the University of Chicago, where Nobel laureate James Heckman is. Called Jim up, and I said, Jim, I'm embarrassed by this number. It looks way too high. Could you check it for us? 2 months later, we get an email back, 18%. So that's why when we first finished that essay, we wrote, as a society, we're way under-investing in high-quality early childhood education for our most vulnerable children. And today, years later, as we're learning more and more about this research, we think that's an underestimate. We think it's underestimating it because we didn't have data on the parents, and we found out later that a number of our parents who are getting mentoring, they go back to school and they go back to work. So they're better off. We didn't have data on siblings in the family. Odds are they're better off. We didn't have data on the productivity of the teachers in K through 3, for example, because if they're getting more engaged students and more engaged parents, odds are their productivity goes up and it benefits all the children. Finally, and this is a recent paper by James Heckman, he went back in one of these longitudinal studies. It was a different one. It was the Abecedarian study, where they started the kids at birth. And he was able to get the health metrics of these kids that are now adults and compared in Abecedarian the kids who were in the high-quality program to the kids who weren't. And there was a dramatic decline in heart disease. So we think we're just scratching the surface here on these benefits, and especially the health benefits. So this 18%, when it really seemed too high, I actually think is too low. So that was our bottom line. We get this great return, and we're way under investing, so we were pushing that as a public policy prescription as to why you should invest in early childhood education for our most vulnerable kids. Clearly, there's a moral aspect to this, but there is a very, very strong economic case.